This is Greer Hendricks, and I'm here with Jennifer Weiner as we are about to publish her fifth novel, Certain Girls, a follow-up to her blockbuster debut novel, Good in Bed. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Greer.
So it's been 7 years since you published your best-selling debut, Good in Bed. Had you always planned to write a sequel? Why did you decide to write Certain Girls now?
Oh, 7 years. That takes me back. Do you remember when we first met?
I do. I totally remember when we first met. And we went to that party.
That was
right,
fun.
right after we signed the book.
Exactly. And then we went out to dinner.
Yeah.
And we sat next to that woman that's like, all I can ever buy are shoes and purses. None of the designer clothes fit me. She looks at me. She's like, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, my God. I would not have remembered that if you hadn't just said that at 11 Madison.
Yeah.
Yep,
that's exactly it.
That's
but,
so funny.
We were so young. Let's talk about how young we were.
Oh, because that was before
babies.
Before babies.
When we colored our hair because we wanted to, not because we had to.
I actually didn't color my hair then, but
shut up.
Sorry. Yes. When we knew what a good night's sleep was.
Before the wrinkles, when we thought we knew what trouble was. We were so young.
When you were writing about breakups.
And you had just gotten married, and I had just met Adam.
That was a while ago. It was like a lifetime ago.
My God, we were different people.
So there you were.
There I was.
Writing your first novel. And here you are 7 years later writing the sequel.
A young reporter at Philadelphia Inquirer, yep. And then, I always did know that I was going to come back to Canny's story, and I always knew that it wasn't going to be sort of picking up 6 weeks later when she's still, sort of dealing with the same stuff. I wanted her to deal with different stuff. Sort of the same issues are kind of through lines in her life. The body image stuff and the family stuff and the father who's gone and the mother who's gay stuff.
The crazy sister who's
stuff.
Changed her name.
Exactly. Well, I had to do that. We'll get into that later.
Okay.
I wanted to write about Canny again, but I wanted to write about Canny as a mother. I thought that would be really interesting. And I wanted to write about her daughter Joy, who's just a baby when we leave her in Good in Bed, as an actual person with some actual issues of her own. And so that was why I sort of picked things up 12 and a half years later, when we're all on the cusp of the big sort of rupture, the big shakeup in the family, which is sort of occasioned by Joy's bat mitzvah and by Canny's husband deciding that he would like to have a baby with his wife. So there you have it.
There you have it. I remember you saying the book sort of started with an image of Joy. Can you tell us about that visual?
I imagined Joy, and I always figured that she'd sort of get the best of both Canny and Bruce, her father, that she'd be this really sort of knockout young woman. I imagined her with all of this beautiful ripply curly hair walking across the parking lot with her head tucked down and her hands shoved in her pockets and just sort of all sort of closed off and buttoned up and looking like she didn't want to talk about it. And I had to figure out, okay, why does she look this way, and what is it she doesn't want to talk about? And I started thinking about the circumstances of her birth. Joy was born very early in Good in Bed, and reading about sort of what are the things that can happen to kids that are born early. And, best case scenario, the kid's just a little small for the first couple of years of his or her life, and worst case scenario is more awful than you'd want to contemplate. But one of the things that I learned that can happen with kids that are on oxygen early on is they can have hearing loss. And I wanted to give her something that would sort of like a memento of her birth, something that she'd have to carry with her and deal with her whole life. But also, hearing is a metaphor. Every teenager says, you're not listening to me. You don't hear what I say. You don't understand me. And I think that every parent has that same experience with their kids of listen, I am coming to you of a position of having gone through this already, and I know more than you, and you need to listen to me. So the notion of hearing and listening is sort of resonant throughout the book in terms of who talks, who listens, what they're hearing when they do listen, what they believe about what they're hearing. That was the image that sort of kick-started the whole thing. And that was a very lofty, windy explanation, but there you go.
That's really interesting because I never knew the full explanation. So this is why I love talking to you at these times. We get to analyze your book in much more depth than just, move this paragraph here.
Right. And why does this character's name keep changing? Why is everybody the same age and all that?
Yeah. So this is your fifth novel. And do you think that your writing style and thematic choices have changed from one project to the next? And
well, I mean, I hope you can like back me up on this maybe, but I hope I've gotten a little better as the work has progressed in terms of learning some things about plot and about structure and about how quickly pop culture references become dated. I mean, listen, the Spice Girls were very big in 2002. I would just like to say that. In terms of my writing style, my ambition was never to be one of those writers where people were like, wow, you know, that was some sentence.
But they do.
Well, thank you.
They do say that.
You're nice to say that. But,
it's true.
You know, I think that there's like a certain style of book where it's all sort of dazzling pyrotechnics and metaphor upon metaphor and simile upon simile. And, you know, I read those books and I'm like, well, what just happened there? Like, I'm losing the story. And I think with me, it's all about the story. And I try to write sort of cleanly and clearly in a way that's sort of evocative so you can like see the people and hear the people, but not, you know, I try not to do that, you know, gee, Mom, look at me writing things. And in terms of my themes, I think that as I've gotten older and had different experiences in my own life, I think that it's added more layers to the ideas that interested me all along in terms of family and what makes a family and how do you deal with your family and how do you let your family define you, and in terms of love and finding a partner, but also how does love manifest itself with a child. I mean, Joy has tremendous problems with her mother. She thinks her mom's really embarrassing because her mother has written this scandalous book, or at least it's a book that Joy perceives as very scandalous. And Canny loves Joy to the extent that she would wrap her in like 100 yards of bubble wrap and then put her in a big plastic safe room. You know, so you know, she is frantic at the idea that Joy is going to get hurt, that Joy is going to have her heart broken the way Candy's heart was broken when her father left, and she just doesn't want anything bad to happen to her child. Well, of course, that's a fantasy. And I think it's one that every parent has, that you're going to somehow keep your child safe, but, you know, the world just doesn't work that way. And so it was interesting to sort of think about love and think about the bonds of family and family commitments through the lens of sort of a mother-daughter relationship where the daughter is just giving the mom a really hard time, and the mom needs to sort of do the work of parenting a teenager, which is letting go.
I think you really nail that dynamic, too. That kind of the push and pull between the two is so powerful.
I think that it's kind of a universal thing. Everyone can remember feeling like one or the other of them, whether you're Joy and you're just frantic to sort of get out from under your parents and make a life of your own, or you're Canny and you're desperate to sort of keep your kids close and keep them safe. Right.
What's interesting is that many first-time authors write semi-autobiographical novels, and I know you pretty well, and it's interesting to see the themes in your books that I know that come from your life or have been taken from your life, but then, you know, expanded or distorted in some way, and
spun into the glorious meringue of fiction that no one can sue you for.
Exactly. But
I like to say,
as you've gotten older, there's different aspects of your life that, you know, can be explored, I guess. So now, you know, you can be writing about, well, you're not a mother of a teenager by far, but writing that mother-daughter dynamic, you know, not just writing about babies, but... This is sort of interesting because I think that all of my books do have an element of sort of where I am in my life right now, where Good in Bed, I was single, in Her Shoes, I was engaged, Little Earthquakes, I had a baby, Good Night Nobody, I had a little kid. This is the first book where there hasn't been that like touchstone where it's like I don't have a 13-year-old, so it was really an act of imagination. And it was a little bit worst case scenario too. I mean, I hope that I'm not going through that with my daughters, but you know, probably I will be, or maybe they just won't care. That's my fantasy, is that, you know, you can have kids who are just like, yeah, my mom wrote a book, whatever. Maybe, but I'm living the dream. Greer. But this is interesting then. Did you tap into your own inner 13-year-old, or did you do research? How did you write about this character that isn't in your house and capture that dynamic so well?
Well, in terms of writing a teenager, it was a lot of sort of remembering what I was like when I was 13. It was a lot of reading young adult fiction because I think it was tricky because if you write a 13-year-old who sounds like a 13-year-old, who speaks like a 13-year-old and thinks like a 13-year-old, I'm not sure you're going to hold the attention of adult readers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a really, really tricky thing to pull off. And I think that that's one of the things that readers have noticed is that Joy is sort of, she sounds a little more adult. She's maybe a little more mature or more insightful than a real kid her age would be. It was an authorial decision. I made her sort of a meta 13-year-old
Mm-hmm.
where she's dealing with the issues of a 13-year-old but maybe has a little more insight or better language to describe them, because I'm not sure you could stick adult readers with an absolutely true 13-year-old and have them be okay with that. But in terms of research, I thought a lot about it. I read a ton of young adult fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to a lot of bar and bat mitzvahs.
Uh-huh.
I have to say, I had a rockin' good time. It's a different world than when I was 13, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the world is like when my kids are ready for their bat mitzvah.
Maybe there'll be a backlash.
That's what I'm thinking. Either that or we're going to raise them Amish.
Right.
It's like, no, your father and I sort of fell away from the faith, but you guys are Amish, and no buttons or zippers for you. They're prideful.
Do you have a favorite character to write?
Oh, my goodness. Well, Elle is always, she's a rockin' good time, too. Elle is Canny's sister, and those of you who, this is a funny personal detail, but in Good in Bed, her name was Lucy, which is a name I've always really liked, and I named the character that before I started dating my now husband. So I finished the manuscript, and I'm dating Adam, and we get engaged, and we get married, and we get pregnant, and we have this daughter, and we decide we're going to name her after my husband's grandfather, Lewis, and as you do in Judaism, you name them after somebody who's died in the family, whose memory you want to honor, and we could not agree on a single girl's name except Lucy. He liked names that I didn't like. I liked names that he didn't like. We went round and round and round and round and round, and finally I'm like, if we name her Lucy and she reads this book where Lucy
poor
is
Lucy.
Like, poor Lucy, where the Lucy in Good in Bed is like, she does phone sex and she does
has
a lot
breast
of
implants.
Right. She does a number of things that you wouldn't want your kid doing. And so I decided in Certain Girls that I would have Lucy change her name in case my Lucy ever reads these books and gets desperately offended and runs away from home. So Lucy is now Elle. Elle has sort of fallen under the sway of a certain self-help book where she sort of is trying to visualize her optimal possibilities, and so she sort of walks around saying, see it, be it, and she tries to get Canny to deal with her problems by visualizing the solutions that she wants, and when Canny tells her she wants a baby, Elle says, well, just visualize it, and Canny, who's had a hysterectomy, says, I really don't think I can visualize myself a new uterus. Elle is like, well, maybe not.
I love also how her philosophy is that she can't even be near people who are
who have undesirable qualities.
Yes, undesirable attributes.
So she won't look at them, and Canny and her mom joke that when Elle is at dinner and she won't look at either of them, they're trying to figure out sort of which she's more offended by, the fat or the gay.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Yeah, Elle, I have to say, she will say whatever, and she's a really good time, and I liked writing the scene where she babysits for Joy when she's a baby, and their big activity is to sort of make fake poop out of Play-Doh and leave it on the toilet for Canny to find, because that's right where my sense of humor is. It's frozen at age 7.
That's so hilarious. And the scene in the spa, I mean, when you're writing these scenes, are you laughing to yourself? Because I read that scene many, many times, and each time I'd be just cracking up. I just thought it was so funny.
I have to say, I always did like the image of sort of Elle being all oiled up with massage oil, and then they wrap her in this silvery blanket for her body wrap, and she gets upset by something and sort of goes squirting out of her blanket and onto the floor. I always did like that.
It's pretty good.
Thank you.
The book is very funny. It's very entertaining, but there are also some serious social commentary sprinkled throughout the book. And as a writer of fiction, what role do these kind of weighty topics play in your work? Because I think a lot of people, they hear your name and they know that it's going to be funny. They know it's going to be a page turner. But then I think sometimes they're surprised that there are these issues, sort of sprinkled throughout.
Well, I think people hear my name and laugh at it.
Yeah.
So sad. But I always want to ground my stories in the real world, and they are funny. I like to think my characters are funny and the dialogue is funny and the situations are funny, but I think the funny stuff works better if it's set in the context of a world where there's real bad things going on. And I always want to have things feel real, whether it's sort of Canny's friend going on this like awful blind date where the guy accuses her of not looking like her online picture that she's posted at ajewforyou.com, which in fact isn't her, so it's kind of problematic. Or, it's Canny sort of being online and going through the news and reading about the sorority that sort of purged itself of all of these sort of overweight or ethnic members, or the overweight teenager who commits suicide and then her mom gets hauled into the police for questioning. I think that these are things that sort of inform the world view of the book, the way they inform my world view. And, by now my readers, I think, maybe shouldn't be surprised there's that going on in my books. I think that after all these books, my peeps know what they're getting.
Yeah.
And I think that, even though I always, first and foremost, I want to write entertaining books. I want to write books where people care about the characters and they care what happens to them, and there's enough sort of tension that they want to turn the pages, find out what happens. But, I always do want to sort of ground them in reality.
What are you working on next?
Well, I'm actually still sort of taking like the baby break. The baby's 14 weeks old, so I'm still sort of just easing back into things. But I am working on a speech actually right now because I have been giving the same speech about Hollywood and the making of In Her Shoes and getting my whole family into the movie for a couple of years now. I can't dine out on that forever, so I'm working on a new speech that has like some funny family stories in it. I'm working on a short story that is super, super dark and morbid, and I don't really know what I'm going to do with it when it's done, but it's an interesting premise, and it's still sort of work in progress. And then I'm just thinking about the next book.
I know. That's the answer you're supposed to be saying. How's that new novel?
That new novel. It's coming great. Great.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and we're really excited for the publication of Certain Girls.
It should be fun.